To grasp the enduring legacy that is Vlad the Impaler, one must delve into his origins, his reign of terror over Wallachia, his signature use of impalement, and the cultural and literary metamorphosis of his person into the mythos of the vampire that still enchants the audience of today. The House of Drăculești, Vlad the Impaler, came into the world in 1431 in Sighisoara, a town in Transylvania which then belonged to the Kingdom of Hungary, as the first son of Vlad II Dracula and his wife Princess Kanaina from Moldavia. He was born into the noble House of Drăculești, a subsidiary branch of the Basarab dynasty that ruled Wallachia, a principality that lay between the Carpathian Mountains to the north and the Danube River to the south. Wallachia was a borderland of critical importance between Christian Europe and the expanding Ottoman Empire, turbulent and contested. Vlad's father, Vlad II, was given the surname Dracula, taken from his inclusion into the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded in 1408 by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund to protect Christendom in the event of an Ottoman Turkish invasion. Dracul comes from the Latin word for dragon, Draco. In the Romanian language, Dracul also happens to mean devil, a dual significance that would later prove highly amenable to horror fiction in the Akucha evilly named Dracula, or son of Dracul. Young Vlad, having been born into a noble family, had many privileges: military training, suitable to his class, and an education. However, his childhood did not pass without hardship either. In 1442, when Vlad was about 11 years old, his father was summoned by the Ottoman court of Sultan Murad II, which seemed to be an invitation to negotiate a truce. Under the terms of that treaty, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were required to be taken hostage by the Ottomans as a pledge for the loyalty of their father. Vlad was subsequently going to spend the next 6 years as a captive at the Ottoman court, learning Turkish and military skills, but in great psychological and physical damage. His early years as a prince supposedly witnessed such sights as horrific punishments and public executions by impaling, a means of punishment he would later employ himself in his reign. The turbulent politics of Wallachia, Vlad's homeland, was an insignificant, unstable principality sandwiched between two great powers, the Christian Kingdom of Hungary to the west and the Islamic Ottoman Empire to the east. This strategic position made Wallachia a buffer state, constantly embroiled in conflicts and political intrigue. The rulers of Wallachia were vassals both to Hungary and to the Ottomans. They usually played one power off against the other in order to maintain a fragile independence. This political tightrope, however, was fraught with danger, as princes who failed to appease either side were quickly deposed or assassinated. Vlad II was no exception to deal with these troubled waters. In 1448, Vlad III had come back to Wallachia after his release from Ottoman captivity to find that his father had been assassinated and his older brother Mircea had been blinded and buried alive by a group of hostile boyars who had aligned themselves with the Hungarians. This would have been a traumatic loss, fueling his desire for revenge and greatly influencing his ruling style, which would go on to become notorious for ruthlessness. His father's death in 1447 was succeeded by political turbulence in Wallachia. Vlad claimed his father's throne but found that a rival, supported by the Hungarians, was sitting on it. Backed by the Ottomans, Vlad seized the throne briefly in 1448 but was deposed after several months. For the next several years, he was in exile, allying himself with various regional powers, including his cousin Stephen III of Moldavia and King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, all the while plotting his return to power. With Corvinus's support, Vlad managed to regain the throne in Wallachia in 1456. This, his second rule, would prove to be the most infamous of his reign as he worked to establish power, rid himself of perceived internal threats, and to fight against the increasing encroachment of the Ottoman Empire, terror and impalement. The regime of Vlad the Impaler in Wallachia from 1456 to 1462, with a short return in 1476, is best remembered for the brutality of his rule, most of all his punishment, method named impalement. This was a slow and agonizingly painful form of execution wherein the victim was penetrated through the body to often through the anus or vagina by means of a wooden stake and left to die over hours or days. Impalement was not Vlad's invention, but he first applied it at an unseen scale, which earned him his terrific nickname Tepes in Wallachian, which translates to the Impaler. Vlad was not only cruel to his enemies, but also to his own people, especially the boyars, whom he saw as treacherous and corrupt. Early in his reign, one of the most representative categories of boyars was invited to an Easter feast by Vlad, apparently to celebrate his rise to the throne. At the dinner, he accused them of treason and immediately had the older boyars impaled. The younger ones survived to be marched off and build his new fortress, Poenari Castle, high in the Carpathian Mountains. This sort of brutal crackdown effectively decimated the power of the boyar class, allowing Vlad to consolidate his authority over Wallachia. One of the most famous cruelties by Vlad took place in 1462 when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II invaded Wallachia with an overwhelming force. Realizing he couldn't resist the Ottomans openly, Vlad decided to employ guerrilla tactics. He launched a night raid on the Ottoman camp in an attempt to kill the Sultan, but never reached the tent of Mehmed. As the Sultan approached the Wallachian capital, Targoviste, he found the road lined with thousands of impaled Turkish prisoners. The Forest of the Impaled, as it came to be known, stretched for miles, and purportedly so sickened the Sultan that he withdrew from Wallachia. Terror was not really a means for Vlad towards retribution, or for terror alone, but also to convey a message to his enemies. Wallachia wasn't up for grabs. His psychological warfare matched with his warrior stature would have told Christian and Muslim opponents of his formidability, captivity, and return to power. Though he was successful in keeping Ottoman invasions at bay, Vlad's reign came to an abrupt end in 1462 when his alliance with Hungary's king Matthias Corvinus soured. Corvinus was under overwhelming pressure from the Pope to join a new crusade against the Ottomans, so Vlad was conveniently arrested on trumped-up charges of treason and then tossed into a Hungarian prison for upwards of a decade. That part of the Balkans belonged once more to the Ottoman Empire. At the same time, Vlad's brother, the good-looking Radu, was ruling Wallachia as a vassal of the Ottomans. Finally, in 1475, Vlad was released from captivity and once again found himself backed by Matthias Corvinus. On his way out, Wallachia was already devastated by domestic disorders and continuous invasions. Vlad became once again Prince of Wallachia in 1476, but the third reign was very short. In this same year he died in battle against the Ottomans, but the details of his death are not clear. Some sources indicate he was betrayed by his own men, while others state that he was killed by the Ottomans. His head, without the rest of his body, is said to have been delivered to Sultan Mehmed II as a trophy. It was displayed in Constantinople on a stake to prove that he had died. Relations to the British royal family. One of the more surprising aspects of Vlad the Impaler's legacy is his distant connection to the British royal family. Vlad III was a member of the Basarab dynasty, through his father, Vlad II Dracula, which for centuries ruled Wallachia. The genealogy of the Basarab family goes far into European nobility, touching upon relations with the Habsburgs and other royal houses. More recently, genealogists have traced Queen Elizabeth II, through her descent from Queen Victoria and the various royal families of Europe, back to the House of Basarab. The British royal family specifically shares an ancestor with him in Mary of Teck, wife of King George V. This remotest of connections spawned the rumours that Prince Charles is a relative of Vlad the Impaler, a claim Prince Charles himself made in an offhand, half-joking comment when indulging his fascination with Transylvania and Romanian history. Prince Charles had even claimed his love for Romania, especially for the Transylvanian countryside, which he has underlined is a place of supreme natural beauty. In 2006, he bought a house in the Transylvanian village of Viskri. The relationship between the British royal family and Vlad the Impaler, to be sure, is dark and for the most part symbolic, but it is nonetheless an interesting addition to the histories of both dynasties. The Dracula Myth. Stronger than the Gothic lineages which were being thrust upon him, Vlad the Impaler would become eternally associated with the personification of the vampire, a creature Stoker would eternize in his 1897 novel, Dracula. While there is no evidence in history that Vlad III drank blood or could in any sense be classified as a vampire, the cruelties and bloodshed associated with his reign predated the creation of the later literary monster. The The connection between Vlad and Dracula is almost a mix of fact and fancy, but within popular culture, this event became a real template for the modern vampire. The name Dracula itself comes from his father, however, Vlad II Dracul, son of the dragon or son of the devil. This title was passed down to Vlad III, who during his lifetime was referred to as Vlad Dracula. It was Bram Stoker, however, who took that historical character of Vlad Dracula and cast him as a vampire lord. However, as an Irish writer who had a keen interest in Eastern European history and folklore, Stoker could have possibly drawn a few parallels to Vlad the Impaler because he researched it without personally visiting Romania. Dracula, as written by Stoker, was part and parcel with much of Vlad's reputed history of cruel death, just as much as it was steeped in dozens of vampire folklore across Eastern Europe. Vampires, then, were an archetypal figure in the region's folklore. They were mostly characterized as one revenant who came back from the dead to take away the life of the living. Vampires were feared as agents of pestilence and death, as outbreaks in the Balkans were often reputedly started by the undead. Stoker combined these folkloric elements with his own imagination in the character of Count Dracula, a type of nobleman who sustains his flight from mortality by feeding on human blood. While Stoker's Count Dracula shared little resemblance with the actual Vlad the Impaler, the connection between the two figures became much more whole as time went on. The success of the novel helped to endorse the name Dracula into the definition of vampirism in the 20th century, and Vlad the Impaler was widely thought to be the historical basis behind the character. With the combination of historical and fictional characters, this developed almost to the extent that they could not be separated from each other. The myth of vampirism and Eastern European folklore. The idea of vampirism is deeply embedded into Eastern European folklore, and it is this backdrop that contributed significantly in influencing both the myth of Vlad the Impaler and the character of Count Dracula. In Romania, the word strigoi was used to describe ethereal beings of the deceased who resurrected to torment the living. These spirits were often believed to rise from their graves and suck the blood of their victims, through that causing illness or death. The strigoi, rather, were the ever-restless dead of unnatural cause, improper burial, or other curses. Vampires in the Balkans were equated with diseases. Sickness in the time of the plague or any other epidemic was usually attributed to the vampires. Their local communities would thus subject themselves to rituals meant to identify and destroy the undead. These involved the exhumation of bodies from dug-up graves and the driving of a stake through the heart so that they would never rise again, burning them into ashes. Arguably, the reputation of Vlad the Impaler for impaling his enemies on wooden stakes cemented his connection to vampirism. The method of execution piercing a person through the body with a sharpened stake is horrifically similar in nature to the folkloric way in which one kills a vampire. Further, his love of bloodshed and the fabled stories of him dining among the impaled corpses of his victims added myth after myth about how connected he was with the substance. Let me just take the time to emphasize this point, that while Vlad's misdeeds created a culture of horror which would become associated with his name, he was not a vampire in his time. That legend was created through a work of fiction published by Bram Stoker many centuries later. They still had a considerable amount of fear about the undead in Eastern Europe, though, and Stoker's Dracula tapped into that huge library of folklore concerning vampires. From brutal legacy, reign of terror, to national heroism. While the connection of Vlad the Impaler to the vampire myth is the most famous aspect of his legacy in modern times, his historical significance is rooted in his cruel reign as ruler and warrior. There was no forgetting of him because he was widely known due to his established reputation as one of the cruelest but effective rulers. His way may have been gruesome, but it had aligned with his brutal ways of controlling a region infested by continuous wars and political turmoil. The most infamous acts of Vlad impaled en masses, which were supposed to remove not just his enemies, but also to serve as a psychological factor for others. Terror was one of the tools of governance in the case of potential rivals or invaders who would think many times before challenging this ruler. The acts of violence did not stop just at the external threats, but were just as ruthless in the handling of internal enemies, which included the boyars, who had plotted against his father and brother. By destroying the boyar class in this manner, Vlad thereby also solidified and centralized authority within Wallachia. In spite of the bloodthirsty cruelty, Vlad is a national hero in Romania who is remembered for his defense against Ottoman invasions. Certainly the defiance of Sultan Mehmed II by Vlad and his resistance against Ottoman dominance won him admirers from the later generations, especially in the rising of Romanian nationalism in the 19th century. In the popular Romanian tradition and public memory, Vlad is a patriot who fought for the independence of Wallachia against all odds. As befits such a brutal ruler, he has left behind a dual legacy, both villain and hero. He is remembered in the West as a bloodthirsty tyrant, but in his native Romania as a strong defender of his people. The tension between these two views really points out how history can be molded by differing cultural narratives. The threat of the Ottomans and European politics. Vlad's reign also needs to be viewed in the light of more general political and military struggles of the 15th century. Oppressively expanding into Europe during this period was the Ottoman Empire under the rule of Sultan Mehmed II. Following the attack and fall of Constantinople in the year 1453, the Ottomans invaded Hungary, Serbia, and Wallachia in their further advances into the Balkans. Wallachia was a principality that lay on either side of the Danube and was an extremely important marchland between Christian Europe and the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Vlad ruled at a time of great conflict between these two powers. The Ottomans were seeking to consolidate their position in the region. In this role of defender of Christianity against Ottoman rule, Vlad gained the support of Hungary and the papacy, both of whom were eager to put an end to the Ottoman advance into Europe. Meanwhile, Vlad became involved in the intricacies of the region's involved politics. He had to tie alliances with Hungary, the Ottoman, and the Holy Roman Empire as a great part of the region's politics, except for having to face rival pretenders to the throne of Wallachia. It is this very fine balance that had to be struck. A good diplomat, fine military commander, fine statesman, and Vlad excelled in every quality. His most famous clash with the Ottomans was in 1462, when the Sultan had just invaded Wallachia. Finally, outnumbered and with the odds all against him, Vlad turned to guerrilla tactics and struck at the Ottoman army in surprise attacks, using the advantage of the rugged terrain. Among the most legendary episodes of his reign is the night attack, where Vlad tried to assassinate the Sultan, to underline his boldness and military ability. Although ultimately conquered and killed by the Ottomans, Vlad had succeeded in holding off their conquest of Wallachia and earning the reputation of a warrior prince. His resistance framed him as a national hero for Romania against foreign intervention and invasions. However, he gained much notoriety throughout Europe for his brutal method of ruling. Bram Stoker's Dracula, the birth of a literary monster. Although Vlad the Impaler's reputation as a bloody and pitiless ruler was well known throughout Eastern Europe, it was not until 1897 and the publication of Dracula that the name Dracula became synonymous with vampirism. Stoker's novel is a Gothic masterpiece, hence it changed Vlad from an historical figure into a terrific monster. But how did Stoker come to choose Vlad as the inspiration for his character? And how did the real Dracula turn into a fictional vampire? Stoker's research for Dracula was extensive, though somewhat haphazard. He drew on a wide range of sources, including Eastern European folklore, contemporary accounts of the Carpathian Mountains, and historical references to Vlad the Impaler. Indeed, among the likeliest sources for Stoker's knowledge of Vlad III is a little-known book called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson, written in 1820. One book that passed mention of him was Vlad Dracula, a prince notorious for his cruelties. Even the name Dracula apparently impressed Stoker, who reportedly stumbled upon the fact that it was a Romanian word to define devil during researching. The rest of the dark associations of the name, when coupled with Vlad's brutality, were just what Stoker needed for his archdemon of a character. Despite this, of course, the Stoker's Count Dracula bears absolutely no resemblance to a biographical take on the historical Vlad. Yet it seems pretty obvious that its association with blood and terror proved an influential factor in the naming of the character. An immediate success, Dracula became one of the most iconic creations in Gothic literature. And Stoker's vampire, a creature living in a crumbled castle in the Carpathian Mountains, preying for the blood of the living, turning into a bat or wolf, is at one and the same time a stroke of genius and a setting of standards for further vampire fiction. In time, Count Dracula would become one of the staples of cinematic and literary horror. Cultural significance of Vlad the Impaler and Dracula. The cultural importance of Vlad the Impaler and his fictional alter ego, Count Dracula, cannot be overstated. Vlad's historical reputation as a monstrous ruler and national hero has been eclipsed in the world's imagination by the fictional character of Dracula, one of popular culture's most recognizable creatures. Yet, in Romania, Vlad's image remains bound to his position as a defender of the realm, while abroad, his image has rewritten him as a symbol of evil. That Dracula became really a sensation in the 20th century and inundated pop culture was in great part due to cinema. The 1931 film Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, firmly cemented this character in the popular imagination and established many of the clichés of the modern vampire: aristocratic charm, nocturnal habits, and a thirst for blood. Bela Lugosi, with his distinctive accent and hypnotic gaze, sealed into images that would become definitive for generations, an iconic image of the creature of the night. Its presence can be felt within numerous films, television series, novels, and even video games. The concept evolved from the Hammer horror films of the 1950s and 1960s to the modern idea presented in series such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and True Blood, each with the vampire mythos deeply rooted in the character that Stoker developed more than a century ago. In Romania, people are taking a more nuanced look at the legacy of Vlad the Impaler. It is really a linkage to vampirism and Dracula that has brought tourism in the region, especially in Transylvania. However, many Romanians believe that Vlad was misunderstood. His brutal methods are often seen as virtuous in the defense of Wallachia, and his legacy brandished more as some kind of national hero, rather than his much darker claim to fame internationally, cross-nation villain of the ages. The timeless legacy of Vlad the Impaler. The life and legend of Vlad the Impaler represent an astounding mingling of history, myth, and fiction. As a ruler, he was typical of his time, savage yet effective, defending his land against both foreign invaders and internal corruption. His reign was marked by extreme violence, although this certainly was also framed by the political realities of 15th century Eastern Europe, where survival rather often required ruthless methods. These devilish deeds of his turned Vlad into the Count Dracula in popular fiction and ensured a place for him in popular culture, if not in official history. The connection between Vlad and professional vampirism is at once direct and indirect, based as it is upon his historical reputation for a certain level of cruelty, then enlarged and distorted through the creative mind of Bram Stoker and his technique. Today, Vlad the Impaler is an intriguing symbol of the battle between hero and monster, history and myth. To this date, he has remained a perennial source of interest among historians, writers, and those fascinated with gore or fate that the real Dracula had been bound to meet within the annals of time. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious.